Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. We talk about how writing works, how writers work, and why the best writers risk being strange. And we're talking again to Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's been on the podcast a few times here, talking about a variety of things. I think last time we talked about Zelda, and that's all we talked about.
Yeah, we never
recall
did.
Correctly.
We never did the second Zelda podcast that you wanted to do.
Yeah, we should do that. I forgot what I wanted it to be about, though, but not this time. Not this time. But today we got a book to talk about, not a video game, and it's Ryan's book, his new book, No Depression in Heaven, which is out of Talon Books. Now you can go check it out. And Ryan, could you talk a little bit about just what the core premise of this book of poetry is? Just a quick summary of what we're talking about.
Oh God. So maybe to talk about it, let me talk about this hat. I'm going to comically wear this hat.
Yes.
And John's going to describe
God's country. What does it say on the top? I can't read this.
So it says, so the hat I'm currently wearing is a piece of knockoff merchandise from Morgan Wallen. If you don't know who Morgan Wallen is,
really?
He's like the biggest country music star going today. Maybe one of the biggest like music stars at like overall like right now. Yeah. And so he was on last year, or I guess earlier this year, he was on Saturday Night Live. And
yeah, that's right.
He made a big show at the, how at the end of every Saturday Night Live, they have the goodbyes. So everybody gets up and waves to the camera and whatever while they play the credits. And he made a big show of like he walking off the stage conspicuously right in front of the camera. And then hours later, he posted an Instagram story of his private jet with the caption, "Get me to God's country." And then within 24 hours, he produced merchandise that looked a lot like this hat.
Right.
So
right.
I paid way too much for this hat to wear it at my various book launches. And the reason I did, other than I think it's funny, is because I think I can explain what the book is quote unquote about, or what the kind of key thread is by talking about this hat. So the phrase, so when Morgan Wallen says, "Get me to God's country," you have to ask, well, what does he mean? He means his mansion in a red state. He means like a rural setting. But also when you think about God's country, he's talking about heaven, right? And so this book came together in a really weird way, kind of a sideways way, where I was doing these poetic improvisations. And eventually that careened into like, I was doing a listening project where I was just listening to the history of country music for no reason other than we were in the middle of a pandemic and you got to do something. And I don't like baking bread. So eventually what I started to notice the further you go back into country music, you eventually get to the Carter family. Now, if you listen to enough Carter family songs, you recognize they've got a ton of songs written during the Depression, the Great Depression, about what it's like to live in bad times, or what it's like to live in latter days. So,
right.
So a song like "No Depression in Heaven," like the premise of that song is, hold on, I've got the lyrics in the book, or that's part of the lyrics in the book.
Yes, that's right. That one part.
So they sing, "I'm going where there's no depression, to the lovely land that's free from care. I'll leave this home of toil and trouble. My home's in heaven. I'm going there." And so you start to notice like this is actually a trope in the 1930s, actually probably longer than that. Like the idea that when life is hard, don't you want to wish for your kind of political horizon is dying.
Yeah.
So that you can get to like the place where things will finally be evened out and your life will finally be good after you're dead. And so like I got really obsessed with this idea of like what it's like to live, because it like my publisher cracked when we were working on the back cover copy. He made the joke, it feels like every book of poetry these days is about bad times. And
Right. Right.
so here I am writing another book about bad times. And so it's it's this strange book of poetic improv strained through country music to get to this question of what it means to live in bad times and how those bad times connect to the past.
It's interesting to me that because on a couple levels, because poetry about country music, but it's not. It isn't the poetry of country music, right? Like it's not celebrating the same things. It's not taking the same line, like syntactic or imagistic approach. It's commenting on it more than it is really doing it. But then you'll still do it a little bit. Like
Yeah.
you'll have these there's that set of poems where you're sort of taking the template of an existing song and spinning off into different directions at certain parts.
Yeah.
You got a lot of quotation from some of these songs and references to things, but then the poems are more obviously uh, than country tends to be, perhaps about kind of like economic structures and other uh, related consumer, like this idea of music as I'm really interested in this idea of poetry, especially lyrical poetry, as a way of commodifying your emotions
Mm.
so that they can be packaged and presented as a product. Even though the product of poetry might not make any money, there's this
Yeah.
sort of level of it. On one hand, it's bound up often in this authenticity project, like country music is, and on the other hand, it's bound up in this romantic project of expressing how I truly feel, which again, country music often will try to cut to that romantic core of a feeling in that way. But then it's also bound up in this weird sort of commodification of the emotion. And it's a templating of the anecdote, it's a packaging of experience. It's often, your poetry, I think, elides some of this stuff, but more normally, poetry is kind of in this commodification mode,
Yeah.
where it's not really participating in capitalism in a certain sense, insofar as it like doesn't maybe make that much money or seem like a good product in a certain way,
Yeah.
but it is sort of just it is on a certain other level the perfect capitalist product.
Yeah.
This thing that can take all the sublime aspects of your human experience that otherwise escape capitalism and just condense them into a product that can be sold.
Yeah.
And so I think country music kind of has, of course, that, especially in its surging popularity, which it'll have like waves of surging popularity.
Yeah.
We're kind of in one recently. Um, but you'll have there's this like surging, there's this way again where it kind of takes the idea of authenticity and romanticism and it sort of packages it up in a very slick um, product
Yeah.
that is very much one a good consumer product. It is a way of making poetry a product. Like country
Yeah.
music, you often have very great lyricists, but there's also simplicity sometimes to the lyricism, which makes it, it hits that pop crossover. Once you had Garth Brooks come in when I was a kid, we had, the big guys were Garth Brooks and Achy Breaky Heart,
Oh, Billy Ray Cyrus.
Billy Ray Cyrus. And, we had Shania Twain. There are people in that vein. You really had a pop country crossover moment when I was younger. And now you've got, of course, the country rap crossover moments
Yeah.
are starting to happen. So it's an interesting cultural force. And I think it's interesting to kind of, as a thing to kind of take on in this certain sense, where you're kind of diving into these issues, which are usually the issues that country music refuses to dive into. It often
Yeah.
refuses categorically to explore at all the economic situation, other than how it might tie into a romantic idea.
Well, and country is because it's sitting at this weird nexus of like authenticity and performativity, because country music is also
Yes.
already performative from like its inception. It's all about
Hmm.
like these middle class, upper class musicians pretending to be rural hillbillies. Not
Yeah.
always. Some of them are quote unquote authentic and will
Right.
sing about
But they
their
don't do
authentic
that well.
experience. Yeah.
Generally speaking, they
Well,
strike poor deals. They go into obscurity.
yeah.
You know.
But so there's that. But at the same time, country music is interesting because by definition, it's always looking back to a tradition.
Yes.
And sometimes that's productive, and other times it turns into this kind of, I was gonna say Trumpian MAGA thing, but that idea of making America great again is
Mm.
much, much older. It goes back to
Yeah,
the
and it is a bunch of
antebellum South and further back, probably. It's
Mhm.
like that idea that if only, like, here's a music that wishes or that attempts to kind of remember or capture something of like a
Yeah,
previous moment that never existed.
yeah, and you'll get interesting figures like Billy Joe Schaefer,
Mm.
who end up who come out and they have that real ability to write a song.
Yeah.
They can write a hit, and he'll write hits for other people, but they have no real ability to. They're too authentic
Yeah.
to to really be a product in a way that Willie Nelson can be a product. And nothing against Willie Nelson, but it's a different skill set, uh, to do that performativity
Yeah.
side of things.
But Willie Nelson
Willie's
is an interesting,
fantastic.
but he's an interesting case because he
Hmm.
started off like heavily in the Nashville system. If
Yep.
you watch like videos of Willie Nelson performing in the 60s, he's like clean cut, he's wearing a suit, he's very like countrypolitan.
Yeah.
Like he wrote Crazy for Patsy Cline, he wrote Hello Walls.
Mhm.
So he was very much in the system of like what country music was at that point. So when he kind of broke out like in the 70s, it was because he was doing something like, you recorded essentially home demos, and that's
Yeah.
Redheaded Stranger, and he was viewed as an outsider from Austin, Texas, right? And then that gets like recaptured again, like Outlaw becomes a marketable like
Yeah. You had that
keyword.
period of the outlaw cowboy outlaw artists, Cash was sort of in that mix and so on. But yeah, it's interesting. I think now you have such an interesting moment in country because it has this crossover they've
Yeah.
realized this potential to cross over into rap and hip hop and vice versa.
Yeah.
You can pull rap and hip hop elements into country. And then they've also seemed to have realized that the two genres, although they seem really musically distinct from one another, they share the interest in performativity and authenticity performance.
Yeah.
And so, there's a really great kind of set of thematic ideas that start to connect. And then, you get good and bad stuff that comes out of that. But it's interesting that how you have this, it's just an interesting cultural melting pot in a sense, uh, this genre of music. And what I like about the book and the kind of idea behind this book is on one hand, it's very focused, but it gives you the opportunity at the same time to get into all these different areas. That because there's a way in which these ideas crop up in other parts of the culture in
Yeah.
really strange and damaging ways. And I think there's a level where um, the crisis of the culture is an identity crisis, um, and country music has an interesting approach to the identity crisis. In a broad sweeping sense, it has this idea of returning, as you say, to like a simpler time
Yeah.
when you could have a more stable identity. Whereas uh, and there's different sides of that, but one of the sort of the core ideas I think that it keeps wanting to circle around is this idea, as you say, that there will be a future time that is like this past time of simplicity.
Yeah.
And it, but it's beyond a political death of some sort. And so it's got an interesting set of ideas wrapped up in there. There's a lot of anxiety swirling around it. You've got this interesting way it kind of, again, there's a performativity of like my difference from this place or this person, that
Yeah.
Waller's kind of has that performativity there. There's this, all this, there's a lot of interesting things that to circle around. So you get some interesting poems out of it. I really like the, I was very impressed, Ryan, by the way, and your sections. You have a couple sections in the book where it's almost like a little play script. It's
Okay.
almost like a recording, like a transcript of a recording or a performance. And like the conceit is like, Ryan Fitzpatrick's performing this song. You got an announcer, then some music plays, then the guy speaks to intro the band, and they're making this, they're doing ads for a national life and accident insurance company. That like transcript and the dialogue in those is so spot on for how they would do those like Grand Ole Opry kind of like tones. I'm curious, it's actually one of the books I think where you show the most range because you have this pitch perfect like replication of this kind of dialogue, but with a little bit of like the satirical edge thrown in.
Yeah.
And then you have, some of the standard poetry things you do. And then you have, some different things that you haven't done before. It's quite a diverse kind of approach stylistically. Uh, I'm curious to know like where you got that idea that you would kind of approach things in these different ways, because a lot of your books tend to be monolithic in style. Like they'll differ widely from one to the other, but they'll tend to sort of be the same type of poem again within the book.
When I started the book, I started it as just a series of style exercise. I was kind of like, to put it the most crudely, I was kind of just fucking around. Which I think is important when you're like in between manuscript projects. You need to like just fuck around with shit. Um,
Yeah.
and so it started with just thinking about sound. So the the oldest section in the book is the section Empty Craft, which is me literally doing a Fred Waugh, William Carlos Williams thing where I'm like chasing vowel sounds and eventually consonant sounds and just trying to make something out of it. And then I did that, and I tried a couple other things. So it came out of this desire at first to do just style exercises to see what I could do. And then once country music kind of crossed paths with this thing I was already doing, then the idea that, oh, I could actually make just writing a book of style exercises make sense if I map on top of it the record album as a form. So the book is structured in, there's a side A and a side B. Each side, quote unquote, has 5 poems or 5 tracks. And then the last thing we wrote was the scripts that you were mentioning, which we wrote basically to give the book some shape and structure. So once I had that sense that I could write like 10 tracks, that gave me permission to kind of go in 10. I don't think they're wildly different. Like there's similarities, like it coheres, but like it gave me permission to like take some leaps I might not have otherwise.
Yeah. It's, I like the format, of like emulating the format of the album, the record album and so on. And I like the other thing I like about it is, you have well, I mean, you get to do some of the tricks you like to do, uh,
Oh, the trick I
but
like to do.
which is good. I'm not saying they're bad tricks, but like they don't become boring. Like like because once you start recognize things, I have this problem with my own writing, where I'll hit on something and I'll do it, and then I'll do it again, and then I'll
You have
do it
to do it.
again.
You have to do it like 50 to 100 times to understand what it
Yeah.
is you're doing.
And then I have the problem of like, well, I have a whole book of this thing, but should I just have 10 pages of it instead? Um, you know, and sometimes I'll do the book, sometimes I'll do the 10 pages inside another book.
Yeah.
But it's always a struggle of like, well, which one should I have here? And what I like about this is, you kind of have you get to kind of reinvigorate things like didn't they cancel apple pie? To me, that's a great. So there's this page 78 where you have in Soviet Russia, blah blah blah. That's a great allusion to me, to that comedian, right? I
Yeah,
forget his name on the side.
Yakov
Yakov
Smirnoff.
Smirnoff. So you start the joke and then you have the blah blah blah, which almost sounds like some of the things he would say in his
Yeah,
jokes. Um, but then you also have, of course, this interesting way that Russia factors into the current political moment. Then you have that, tying it to the didn't they cancel apple pie? And canceling apple pie is almost an interesting callback to like the 50s paranoia of Soviets are going to cancel American things and
yeah,
destroy American culture. It will infiltrate from the inside. Smirnoff is kind of this weird parody and presentation of that in reverse. Um, and then that sort of idea of apple pie as a sort of quintessentially American thing that then therefore country music could be sung about. But what if country music is under threat? Like America's under threat. Like there's so many nested sort of ideas in there. It's nice density, but it just moves along quickly and like easily. And it's a nice, there's almost a flightiness to it. So I feel like it is a nice synthesis of some of the things that you like to do or have done. And then like you can do that for a bit and you can move to something else completely. Like
yeah,
I feel like the structure, it really makes these, like in some ways, these are some of the shorter poems you've written lately.
yeah.
But
Well, I know my last book has like an 80-page long poem in it, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
and you used to do these much more concise short poems that were really dense. And then you started doing these kind of longer poems that were still dense, but they were a bit more measured and expansive. And here I feel like you've got a nice, almost in between sort of thing where like they're kind of longer than short poems, but they're shorter than long poems, and they have
yeah,
a density to them. But you can kind of miss the density very easily without really having yourself too affected, and so on. So it's got a nice variety in that sense, which again nicely recalls the variety show where country music,
mm,
used to have its heyday, and it used to be one of the only things you'd see on television in terms of
yeah,
music. And now, then it kind of got banished from television on a certain level, and now it's starting to come back to television in a substantial way. But then it's at odds with the industries of Hollywood and New York, television and so on, in a intellectual fashion, perhaps you might say, while it still wants to feed off them, right? Like he agreed to do Saturday Night Live as an example,
yeah.
you know, and there's lots of reasons to do that, but it's not like someone held a gun to that guy's head and made him do Saturday Night Live.
No, he did it on
It's
purpose. Like,
very measured, very specific. He's
yeah,
posting a particular thing. He's got the merch, it's so smart on a certain
yeah,
level and so planned. But there's the performance that is spontaneous.
yeah.
Was that the thing that grabbed your attention I forget when that happened. I thought it was more recently.
It
So,
was.
so
I
you'd
think
written the
it.
book already by then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's
Yeah.
no reference to this. Like, otherwise there would
Right.
have been a poem called this or something.
What's the moment or the thing that made you grab country music and pull it into this mixture and kind of start to really think, oh, that's how I'm going to organize these ideas?
So I.
So a lot of these ideas pre-exist the book in the sense that you've been playing with some of these ideas
Yeah.
throughout earlier books.
So I think it was. So I had been listening to this album by Iris DeMent. It's kind of this like secret classic album from the 90s, called Infamous Angel. And it's great. But there's a song at the end of that album called Mama's Opry. And I kind of got semi-obsessed with it because it has a weird structure. So the verses are all about, she's singing about when she was a kid, and her parents, specifically her mom, would like listen to the Grand Ole Opry on the radio, and they'd have parties and whatever. And then she would listen to her mom sing the songs from the Grand Ole Opry while she was hanging laundry, and then say, "Oh, this is the real Opry, is my mama's Opry." And then she would go break into the chorus, and the chorus was just like at first I thought it was like semi-religious gobbledygook. And then I realized no, she's just naming gospel songs, like country gospel songs.
Oh,
Um
really? Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And she doesn't explain, like Dement doesn't explain what she's doing, but that's what she's doing. And then that sent me into this like research spiral where I started, that's where it started. Like really the I had written 3 sections of the book, and then the fourth section was this one called Hollow Square that recasts all these like gospel hymns. And the reason I got into it was because I had gotten obsessed with this Irish Dement song and figured out, oh hey, a lot of these songs have the same theme, which is like that theme of like the song No Depression in Heaven by the Carter Family.
Mhm.
And so I for some reason I went, I think it was because I had suggested this to students, to creative writing students as an exercise. So I said, I'm going to do this exercise, and that's, I'm going to take a set of song lyrics and I'm just going to swap all the words.
I used
I'm
to do
going to
that.
keep the, I'm going to
Yeah.
keep the form, swap all the words. And it became like this thing. And once I did that, I'm like, well, what if I just started, what if the whole thing was about music and country music? And it ended up not like, it's all thematic, but like only some of it is addressing music specifically. I think
Yeah.
the second piece was finding out about Floyd Kramer's slip note piano playing, which is where he will play a note somewhere in a chord and it's the wrong note, and then he'll correct himself. And so I started thinking about like correcting, or like
Things are
um
slightly wrong. Like
yeah,
I had an interesting thing. I don't listen to a lot of country anymore, but
yeah,
I go in waves there, right? But I was listening to, I'll go on these YouTube holes or something where I'm just really into something particular. And the one that was recently, it was in my hip hop moods. I got really interested in uh, I forget the name of the producer, but he used to be in the he did the song uh he used to be in the Roots.
okay,
He was like the white guy in the Roots. I forget his name all of a sudden. He's like the biggest producer in music history. Where, but he did the song "Forgot About Dre," and but there's that song when it has like this weird like piano like ding 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 ding, but he plays it slightly wrong
mm,
because when he played it correctly, it didn't sound right.
yeah,
And it's like one of those. There's so many like little weird things like that, where it's like if you just do it the right way, sometimes it doesn't have the personality.
yeah.
And that slip note playing is a really interesting example. You mentioned that in the book to some degree,
Well, that was the original title of the book, was Slip Note.
right? Hmm.
I'm glad I changed it, but that Slipnote is interesting because it evokes his piano playing style. It evokes this kind of like, it kind of sounds like Slipknot.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Slipknot, which of course has a lot of associations in it too.
Yeah,
But how do you when you hit upon something like that,
yeah,
like oh, I'm going to take this idea or this thing that I'm going to draw. Like I'm not necessarily making every poem about this thing, but
yeah,
I'm going to start pulling from it for some of the structuring ideas or just to
yeah,
kind of anchor things. Like a lot of times I talk about it in creative writing class. I say like if you got a more abstract set of ideas or some more abstract things you're trying to write about, problem you get into immediately is like you don't want to be stuck in this abstract language because
yeah,
there's no liveliness to it. So you need to like anchor it to something.
yeah,
And I always use the metaphor that Dennis Cooley taught me, the poet Dennis Cooley, of mining the site. So you pick a site and you just see what's there. You just
yeah,
dig into it, you do research, you just
yeah,
try the language out that's in that site. You play around it, and so I find like that can work so well. But I'm always interested in like why people pick a site or when they pick a site or whether like how it coheres
yeah,
and like what they do once they have it, because sometimes I'm sure you've had this experience too. Like I find like it rarely is the what you expect it to be in a certain
mm,
sense. Like I always find myself, and I'm curious, you're always working on a bunch of things, it seems, but I always find myself where I'm I'll be working, I'll get this idea
Yeah.
like to write a book about, X, and I'll think, oh, that's a great place, that's a great site to mine. That's a great thing to write a book about. And I'll just keep trying to do it and it won't work. And then like at some point in the process of trying to make this thing work and like force it into submission, I'll just get some other idea that ties everything together
Yeah.
instead. Like if I just replace this original idea with this other thing, now it all works. And whereas, I've had a couple of times where it's like, oh no, this thing is this thing. It all works now. But I find like, yeah, you almost to kind of mirror what you were saying, like you're almost in a space like fucking around and
Yeah.
trying things out. But you can almost delude yourself into like thinking, oh no, I figured it out. I'm not fucking around.
Yeah.
I'm really doing it now. But then it turns out you were wrong and delusional, and you were just fucking around. You didn't have the core of the idea yet. Yeah, and I don't know. Like, I'm curious to know, like, at what point in that process did you get this like grafting of country music onto the thing? Like, was that late or was that early? And like, once you had that, did it really come together, or was it like a struggle to figure out how to make it work?
It was so it was probably if we think in terms of sections of the book, I had 3 of the 10 sections written like before the country music thing started to like intervene. Um and so the next 3 sections were me trying to make it work, and some of it failing and some of it clicking into place. Like, but I was kind of dogged about it because like the piece that worked were those hymn poems. I'm like, these 4 poems, this one section, like I need to figure this out so they can appear in a book, because like um so it became like doing the research, um fiddling around, trying things, um accepting that like a lot of writing the book was accepting that like some of the sections aren't going to be immediately visible to people as like country music poems, whatever that means. Like a lot of them are more contemporary. They're about like information structures, or they're kind of sideways where um um they're about like ancillary themes. Like there's a poem about like the Tennessee drag bands, right, in the book. um So some of them came out of the research, but didn't come out like in this way that was immediately apparent. Some of the inspiration came from poetry, where the poem where the Yakov Smirnoff lines appear is me trying to do a Louis Cabri
I was
impression
gonna
and
say
failing.
it seems very Louis Cabri in many ways.
I'm expecting Louis going to read it and go, "This is nothing like my poetry. What are you talking about?" It's going to be
Well, I'm
great.
just thinking of his
Yeah.
first book, but or but
Well,
but
that's the reason he came in, was because one of the first times I saw Louis read, he read this poem from his first book, The Mood Embosser, and there was a line in it, and it's the only line I remember from the book, where it was like, it was a line when I read it on the page, I had no idea like what does this mean, and then he sang it, and it was like
mm,
all night we were the young Hegelians, and I was like, click. It was like a
right,
like a
right,
like a light switch turning on, right?
yeah, sure.
And so when I was doing this song lyric stuff, like Louis came to mind because of that reading,
Mm,
and I went, what if I try this? What if I just
right.
try to like imitate him for a
Well, in
while?
that slip note style, like the idea of like you're doing like he has that he's not the only one, but yeah, I think he was the one who did it best, you know, in that school, in the Kootenai school, of that almost like that idea that like it's almost a thing you've heard before.
Yeah.
Like it's almost a normal phrase. It's just that this letter's wrong or this word is wrong. And it's, you if you read it too fast, you might think it said a different thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a neat effect that you get like when you kind of have to look a second time like that, because it's so close to something
Yeah.
you've read before. And of course, when you're dealing with songs or anything that has that like that song like patterning, um, you can just easily, because of the patterning, just slip past something and then have to go back to it.
Yeah.
You got this, and you've got some other lines in the book where it makes me think like there's an interesting tension. I'm always interested in tension as the driver of the poem. I often will say to us when I teach writing, like when I teach fiction, like, conflict is the driver of the story, and tension is the driver of the poem. This conflict between ideas, um, and uh, and the paradox is always so nice to use in poetry for that reason. And country music will often squeeze a paradox uh, for like comedic effect,
Yeah.
right? Or use a joke structure, or
Yeah.
otherwise
One of
turn things.
one of my favorite country music songs, Gary Stewart's She's Acting Single, I'm Drinking Doubles.
Yeah, those kinds of lines are so great, and they're often memorable, right?
Yep.
And Post Malone and what's his name have a song that has a similar kind of thing. Like,
Oh
I
God,
forget.
what's that?
Like, it's the but the idea that it takes two of us to get into this much trouble.
Yeah.
I needed, I wasn't I needed God help. I had some help. That's what the song
Yeah.
is. I had some help. I wasn't the only one taking the bottle off the shelf kind of thing. Which again, that's just classic country music, kind of like you slightly twist the idea around into like its opposite form a little bit. And you play a whole joke around that.
Yeah.
But then like there's an idea, like an emotional heart to the joke,
Yeah.
but the joke is almost performing that, like, I'm going to pretend that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of like the joke structure of so much country music has that kind of doubleness of like, you and I are pretending this doesn't bother us.
Yeah.
But really it does truly bother us. And that's what the song is about, like, but we can connect about how it's
Yeah.
funny, because it's so miserable and we feel so bad, like it often has that kind of dimension.
What's that George Jones song? Just because I asked a friend about her, she thinks I still care.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Like there's so many great sort of things like that. What I like is, so you've got it's a different kind of thing,
Yeah.
but it's the same idea where like, there's this line on page in which poem is it in? It's at the end of it's on page 114. So the end of These Are the Good Times, you've got this line, I want the grace, but might adjust your face. Like
Yeah.
the crudeness following like you know, the plea for like almost a religious grace,
Yeah.
like it's got that great, country-ish, like kick to the gut joke setup punch, but it's also got that nice like tension between like the religious yearning and the like, right now I need some immediate gratification,
Yeah.
through violence. And that's got an interesting, political dimension, as well, like in terms of like a commentary on, any political moment you want to grab, out of the air, recently in particular. So I just think there's a lot. I always appreciate books, or poems, or where there's a lot going on, but the writer isn't necessarily hammering you over the head with the fact that so much is going on.
Yeah.
Which is tough to do. It's easier said than done. I think I have been guilty of, hammering people over the head, sometimes with, there's a lot going on here,
Yeah.
guys. Other times I
Pay
actually do.
attention.
Yeah.
Pay
Other
attention.
times I'm pretty good about, walking the line, but every once in a while I'll like hit into that mode where it's like, it's almost incomprehensible to anyone. How could you understand this poem? Um, and like, sure, there's things going on there, but it can be, but I like walking that line where like there's enough here going on and it's clear enough that there's a lot going on that you're not necessarily able to follow it all at a cursory glance, but there still is something to follow, and so you don't need to start digging into it deeper if you don't want to. You can still get something here, but you could, of course, go down the rabbit hole
Yeah.
and like Google, what this thing means. Start looking up Roy Rogers picking peaches in a labor camp and what that refers to.
It refers literally to Roy Rogers, like working in a labor camp.
Yeah, right.
He was like a migrant worker.
Yeah.
And then the joke is you get the line later where it's Robin Pecknell from Fleet Foxes. They have that song "Helplessness Blues," where the song goes like, "If I had an orchard, I'd work till I'm sore." So it's like that kind of like
Right.
that wish from a different angle, from a different generation, where it's like
Labor.
romanticizing that kind of labor, right? In a way
Mhm.
that like generations before it would have been like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Do you still
And
feel that?
even in a moment now, like it's migrant workers still like picking crops in the States. That's like those are all the
Hmm.
exceptions that people want them Trump to make over ICE, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
what were you gonna ask? Sorry before
I
I
was gonna say, do you feel like that's still the big touchstone for you stylistically or thematically, the Kootenai school, and that sort of interest in labor?
it's in there for sure.
Yeah.
Like Kootenai School and then like
Because you seem to be diverging
yeah.
more and more from it, if that makes sense. Like I think at one point that was one of your larger influences, although Flarf was your more obvious influence.
Yeah.
I think your deeper influence was the Kootenai school and people like Cabri and Dirksen and so on.
Like I
Uh,
think
but
they
you
were
never really wrote like them
yeah.
a whole lot.
Yeah.
And then I feel like you start to diverge. You've been diverging more and more from those things. And I'm curious to know where you think you're going.
I have no idea. No idea. Like
Right.
all the new stuff I'm writing right now is like extremely flarf pilled. Where I'm
Interesting. I
writing
can't
like
do Flarf
poems.
anymore. Google's too good.
No, I'm just imitating it. I'm just like
Yeah, now
it's
you're
less.
just
It's
taking the
not
base.
about Google at all. It's just about like writing bad poetry on purpose, which
Sure.
is the other half of flarf that I was trying not to do when I was
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But you're
doing the
you're
Google
gauging
sculpting
more in
stuff.
it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think now's the
Mm.
time. We could
There's
talk. Maybe we could talk about this in 2030 when the next
Yeah,
book
that
comes
might
out.
be a yeah, it's almost a separate topic, but that idea of kind of writing a bad well, that's an interesting thing though to just bring back to country for a second.
Yeah,
As you sort of start to move toward a wrap up of sorts. Because one of the things I always find interesting about country, and it's also again a thing that I find interesting about rap
yeah,
right now, is the performance of authenticity. And part of that is in rap, especially, is the performance, but it's also in country, but it's the performance in rap that like there's a real investment right now among rappers in the idea that you don't write,
mm,
but you're just saying things. And like the idea that freestyling, saying things unpreparedly, and that is, you're sort of it's sort of the modern form of the rapper proving that they're possessed by the genius,
yeah,
and the muse has chosen them. It's like, oh, I just say things, I just speak and it right, labels think I wrote it. Gunna has a great song where he says, I'm just spitting things, I'm just spitting words, labels think I wrote it. And there's that idea a lot of rappers have present that they're just saying things spontaneously. They've come up with this brilliant idea.
yeah,
Now you got other guys like Kendrick who's like obviously writing, and talking about how he writing a song about his pen being his lover. But the trend is not that. Like the trend is this this performance of like as if there's no artifice.
yeah,
And these guys are the most complicated um, you know, writers that you can find on a stylistic, formal level. They may often have nothing to say, but
yeah,
formally, they're incredibly complicated things that they're doing. But the pretension is that they're not doing anything.
mm,
And I find country music shares that on some level where like the pretension of a lot of those guys is they're not writing anything. They're just sort of telling you something that happened the other day, or
mm,
right, they're telling you a story about a thing that happened in their life, or they're just saying like how they feel,
yeah,
but it's often a very straightforward metaphor. It's often a conceit, an extended metaphor that goes throughout
yeah,
the whole thing. It's often very complicated how they'll move it from one position to the other, or sorry, how they'll surprise you with a turn in the direction and so on. Like and again, you have an interesting kind of like approach to this pretension that you're not writing. in a weird
Yeah.
sort of way. Like, but it's just, somehow,
Well, in quite literally with country music, most performers aren't the ones writing.
which is also
Country
interesting.
music is a songwriter's genre, right?
Mm.
Um, the best songs are like come from a performer who's interpreting something that someone else has written.
Yeah. And so I just find the genre is so interesting because it's so invested in appearing to be a thing that is like appearing. It's so invested in appearing to be a thing it isn't,
Yeah.
while also presenting the thematic idea that authenticity is all that matters.
Yeah.
And everyone just will ignore that. It is obviously a fake.
Yeah.
So it's got an interesting. It almost has an interesting analog to certain political moments and movements where you have this weird, acceptance of a thing that is clearly untrue.
Yeah.
And it's almost unassailable in a strange sort of way. It's like, well, nobody here really believes that is true. So the fact that you're attacking it as untrue is insane, where, and so you have like, it's interesting that it has all these strange cultural resonances once you start digging into anything like that has that sort of anything that has an identity attachment like that, I find, especially like, people who are big into country music. Like I used to, I think a lot when reading this book, I was thinking about, my daughter used to have this, boyfriend.
Mm.
It's not dating anymore, but they were dating for a while. And he, was he'd grown up in the city, but he was very like into country music. And he, would like, was like wear button shirts and like he would like kind of go want to get. He was like always talking about how he wanted to get some cowboy boots. And it was just very like the aesthetic of the country boy, but he wasn't a country boy. But I'm a country boy. Like I grew up in a town of 40 people, in the middle, like surrounded by farms, a bunch of cows everywhere, like a high school, like from my high school from 9 to 13, because we used to have a grade 13, was 130 people in all those grades put together. Like it was very much a small, tiny rural area, all the cliches, but like none of us were like this kid.
Yeah.
Like that just was like, it's like the idea of the thing versus the actual thing. Um, it's always so interesting to me, like how those ideas of a thing, and what it means, especially when they're these pretensions or these performances of things like authenticity and trueness and so on. They clearly just relate to these projections, and so it's always interesting, I think, to kind of dig into them, as the book does, and kind of like start to kind of pick apart the projections on some levels and start to kind of wonder, well, what is the kind of behind this thing?
Yeah.
Or what's the use of it, you know, in some way? And also at the same time, like to show an affection for the genre, which I think you do here.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that like the reason I started listening to it was just like I remembered listening to it as a kid and I was like, I wonder if like, do I like this?
Yeah. As a kid, it's hard to remember,
Yeah.
but we didn't have a lot of choice.
Yeah.
Like when I grew up, you could hear a country song on the radio or you could hear a 60s song. There was nothing else. So if you wanted to hear a song that wasn't a country song or a 60s song, you had to like tape it from your friend's tape that they got when they went into the city, which was 4 hours away.
Yeah.
Which sometimes people would do. You know what I mean? Like it was kind of like that thing. So when I grew up, country music was almost a representation of all the things I didn't ever want to hear again
Yeah.
or listen to, or this whole culture that seemed American to me and very inauthentic to me in a strange sort of way. But even as it was presenting itself as the other thing. And then as I got older, I started to kind of appreciate country music a bit more, as I started just listening to it more as music. But of course, it isn't just music,
Yeah.
right? It has that cultural history and all these weird dimensions to it, and these different genres, these different ways it's been mobilized, sometimes in racist manners, sometimes in a more wholesome ways, other times in just confusing ways, to represent outsider figures
Yeah.
who at the same time are, running this industry. It's a strange sort of, it's an interesting genre because it has such a rich history and tradition,
Yeah.
but it also is a really complicated one for the same sort of reasons. And it's, I think, also interesting just as a genre that has become hybridized, uh, whereas other genres have had moments of hybridization, but they have fizzled out. Like metal had a moment where it was
Yeah.
hybridizing, but then it just went away. The new
Yeah.
metal thing just went away. Um, but country has had a more successful integration into pop.
It's always like grappling with that pull between like hillbilly music and then whatever else it can suck in that enters its orbit from like like pre rock and roll pop music that maybe we would call like adult contemporary now,
Yeah, right.
to like you mentioned hip hop, like,
Yeah, especially nowadays. Everything's hip hop. Hip hop's taken over.
well, hip hop, or the other thing in country music now is just like so many songs are produced by the guy who produced Nickelback.
Yeah.
So it's this hyper compressed, it might as well be mid 2000s rock music.
Yeah, and in fact, it's often better rock music than than the rock music you hear.
Well, that's another conversation about like the death of
That's
rock music.
yeah, it's got it's yeah, that's a whole other thing. Let's just not get into it. But does this all mean, Ryan, just to end up here, does this all mean you finally bought some good speakers? Because last time I was at your place, you were playing some song through like these tinny computer speakers the size of my phone, and I couldn't even stand it.
I've got like a shitty Bluetooth speaker,
At least
so
you have a
probably not.
speaker.
Yeah. So it plays from my phone on the shitty Bluetooth speaker.
Well, I don't know if this is a good or bad thing for listening to old country records, but maybe that's the natural state of them. The more compression, the better. Perhaps
It has to
we have
sound like it has to sound like it's coming out of an AM radio.
yeah, out of a tin can, radio of some sort. Um, yeah. Is there a lesson you think you've learned writing this book as a writer?
Uh, God, you want a takeaway? You want me to give you a takeaway? What did I learn from writing this book?
Well, I don't need a takeaway, but I just mean like because the context for asking that is we've talked in other episodes in the past about
Yeah.
this idea that, one of the things that you historically have done, whether you're still doing it or not, I'm not sure, but it's like after you do a book, you'll sort of like almost make a little mental list of what you're going to do and not going to do going forward. Like you'll kind of disallow yourself from doing this thing
Yeah.
because you did it too much. But then this other thing, maybe you think you could explore it a bit more. I'm just wondering, this book's a bit more eclectic.
I think that's like because there's no 90-degree turn. Like
Right.
I think like the one thing the one thing I think the next book is gonna do is I like having the short, long eclecticism where instead of having one big sequence or one kind of continuous thing, I like the idea that I can have like here it's 10, maybe in the next one it's a dozen or more, but like shorter chunks that take up some formal problem and kind of drive it into the ground, and then trying something different but with a connection, right? So the manuscript that I'm working on right now, tentative title Slop, like
That's
it
okay.
started with what if I work with repetition, and what if I just like put a bunch of stuff in all caps, which of course is like that's Trump's mode, right? Is he
Yeah.
tweets or truth socials or whatever, and it's always all caps.
Is there a connection to AI slop in there?
Probably eventually. That's
Hmm,
I was just thinking about content, right? Whether it's AI or not, but just like the glut
right.
of content.
Yeah.
and how that's my question is, how is that and like aesthetics in general connected to fascism?
Right. Yeah. Which is a very good question. And when do we need the answer to? As soon as possible, Ryan.
I'll work on it. I'll work on it.
Well,
But you've read my book, so you know there's
yeah.
no answer coming from me.
No. There's no battle plan at the end. Sad to say. But that's for greater minds, Ryan, to think of than us.
The Greater Minds called the Computer Banks, run
Yes.
by Sam Altman.
Sam Altman. He'll figure it out. I trust him, don't you? Well, thanks for talking to me about No Depression in Heaven. Everyone, I do recommend this book highly. It's one of the better poetry books I've read in quite some time. And I always like Ryan's work, but you also have one of the few distinctions of being one of the only writers, perhaps the only living writer, that I've quoted in an epigraph to one of my books. Because in The Politics of Knives, I have a line from Ryan's book, the quote, "My assassin brings me products I love," which is one of my favorite lines. And it just was perfect for that book. So this book surely is again, a very quotable book that I just got lots of great moments in. The other thing,
what's your favorite quote, John? Come on. I know we're ending, but now you're like,
it's a simple line, so it doesn't have, I think in and of itself, it's not a great quote.
yeah.
And out of context, it's not maybe the greatest line, but I live the trad. Like that line, "I live the trad," has so much density to it for me, because it has, of course, this association to like the trad wives, and all that kind of weird, trendy, kind of pseudo like oddity, where like often that stuff is presented as some sort of weird attack on feminism, but also some sort of hyper feminism.
Yeah.
But then also just disconnected from that, it's idea that you are living sort of in the unfortunate, like there's also like the idea of returning to a traditional value, but also of being terrorized by traditional values.
Yeah.
Like I think all that gets kind of bound up in the same. In the line, I don't know that the line pops exactly the way that some of your other lines do, but I think that's one of the lines I think is a more understated line that has a lot more going on than sort of seems at first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that
But I really like that idea of being sort of both, beholden to a tradition and terrorized by the tradition, like that kind of anxiety of influence notion. But and then just to toss it off like in an unconcerned way, I think has an interesting like doubleness to it as well. Well, yeah. So thanks for chatting with me about your book here, Ryan, and keep writing the wrong way.